Okay, hi, welcome everyone. My name's Nikki Gillies. I'm the Louisiana DeafBlind Project Director, and I'll be presenting our Lunch and Learn today, which is part of LASARD's Lunch and Learn series. Check it out every month. I'm co-presenting with my colleague, Dr. Rose Angelocci, and we're excited to see some folks on here. Today, we're talking about making visual supports accessible for students who are blind, deaf-blind, and have low vision. And, we have some material to go through, but we also really want to hear from y'all and what is useful to you. So we'll have questions at the end, but if you have any quick questions as we go through, please just jump in. If you don't mind muting your microphone, if you don't have questions, that's very helpful. Okay, so we are housed at the Human Development Center. Both the DeafBlind Project and LASARD are housed at the Human Development Center, which is within LSU Health. We just rebranded. This is our new snazzy logo, so you're going to be seeing that a lot more. And I just have a really quick 30-second video to share with you about the Human Development Center, and then we'll move forward. Well, the audio is not working on the video. I'm sorry, y'all. Hang on 1 second, please.
When you shared your screen, did you hit share audio as the option? You might have to unshare and then reshare, and just make sure you check the box that says share audio.
Share audio, okay. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Great. Okay, let's try this again.
To achieve a self-determined life, an individual with disabilities requires the combined support of their family, the professionals who serve them, policymakers and elected officials, as well as their community. But success is only possible when everyone works together with the individual at the center. We build the capacity of communities to create the changes needed for individuals with developmental disabilities to fully participate in all aspects of community life. We are the Human Development Center at the LSU Health Sciences Center.
Okay.
To achieve a self-determined life,
briefly, we have a lot of different programs at the Human Development Center, ranging from early childhood through transition, everything in between. This is just a quick snapshot of the different programs you can find here. So if you're interested in more information, you can check it out at our website, hdc.lsuhsc.edu. And we also are on social media. Okay, so the Louisiana DeafBlind Project is part of a national network of state deafblind projects funded by the Office of Special Education Programs. We're responsible for doing an annual deaf-blind child count for children and youth 0 through 22, which gives a more accurate picture than the Part B child count, which some of you might be familiar with. And we are also tasked with providing training, consulting, referrals to outside agencies and entities, classroom observation, support for teachers and professionals working with students who are deafblind, as well as family engagement and professional development. So we hope that you will share information about us with your colleagues if you have any students that you want to take a deep dive with us and figuring out what they might need in terms of accommodations, support, resources for families, et cetera. So that's what we are here for. We're grant funded, so none of our services come at any cost. And we're a statewide resource for students that have any combined hearing and vision loss between 0 to 22. And briefly, since many people are not always necessarily familiar with the definition of deaf-blind, people tend to think of someone who's totally deaf and totally blind, like Helen Keller is probably the most famous deaf-blind person in history. In reality, deaf-blind is a label that refers to any combination of hearing and vision loss or progressive diagnosed future hearing and vision loss, as well as any combination of auditory and visual processing issues. So it actually includes a lot more of the students that you probably work with than you may realize, which is a good thing because it means that you can access support and resources. So we are based on the federal IDEA definition, not the 1508 definition. So in other words, most students that qualify for our services do not have deaf-blind listed as their exceptionality in their IEP. So I think that's important to mention, just so that y'all don't hesitate to reach out if you want to access support for a specific student. And if they don't qualify ultimately, we'll still send you some resources and connect you with the right people who can be of assistance. We work with students everywhere from, receiving accommodations on a 504 plan in a mainstream classroom, to homebound due to medical concerns, to self-contained classrooms, students that are getting pulled out throughout the day. Really, the setting doesn't matter, the exceptionality doesn't matter, and whether or not they have an IEP doesn't matter in terms of accessing Louisiana Deaf-Blind Project resources and supports. So it's a very diverse population and a wide variety of access that these students have to the hearing and vision. 90% of the children we work with have additional disabilities that have been identified. So sometimes that can mask their deaf blindness. So let's get into the topic. We are here to talk about making visual supports accessible. So what we mean by visual supports briefly are the types of visual symbols that you might use with a student. So there's some examples on this slide, everything from a realistic photograph of a carton of milk to a stylized realistic drawing, a realistic drawing. The word milk, that's a visual symbol. And then I have a little picture of some PEC symbols that probably many of you are familiar with. They're those small drawings on the right of my screen that are often used for kids that are using AAC devices. And for students that are blind, low vision, deaf-blind, those types of visual symbols just don't work. They may not be, if they have low vision, they may not be accessible to the vision they do have. If they're not using their vision, then they need alternatives. And so they don't have to go without, they can use tactile symbols. And so I am going to hand it over to Rose to talk about replacing visual symbols with tactile symbols.
Okay. So tactile symbols are a static communication form, something that they can recognize by touch. So some type of item recognized by touch, typically used by students who may not be at the point where they're reading Braille. And it can include real objects. So you can actually have a real object on the card, a partial object. I think about, like, when somebody wants to go out and swing on the swing set, that you might have a piece of chain because that's what they're touching. That's what they recognize. Representation of objects through a miniature or some kind of cutout of the object, or can be abstract symbols for, representing a concept or that communication system.
So this requires, next slide.
Yeah. This requires some level of symbolism to move past real objects, right? So we start with real objects and, can move past that if they're to that point of symbolism. And it's very customized to the student. It's got to be something that they're familiar with, that they associate that object to what you're trying to communicate to them. And these items can be used both for receptive or expressive communication for the student. Next slide.
And I'm just going to add, we will have some picture examples for you all, so you get a sense of what we're talking about just in a few slides. All right, we're on the next slide, Rose.
Yeah. So it's very important to be very consistent about the use of any type of tactile symbol. So it needs to be the same symbol every time you're showing it. And everyone on the team should be using the same symbols to communicate, specific tasks that they're doing. It needs to be consistent across people and what is presented to the student. The items should be presented immediately before the object, place, person, event, activity, to get that association going. It needs to be presented consistently in the same manner to the student. Next slide. And they need to be left with the student while the activity is going on. and always available within reach for them to be able to express back, not just to receive the message of, here's a concept you want them to know, but they need to be able to communicate that back. So it needs to be handy. And we introduce things to students who are deafblind through the hand under hand method. And we got a little video on this.
We do. Let me just switch over my screen share so I can pull it up without the ad for you. 1 second. Someone will just give me a little thumbs up once we start. If you have audio, that would be great.
The hand-underhand technique. When using the hand-underhand technique, the teacher places their hands underneath the learner's hands to invite them to observe how the teacher completes a skill or activity.
Okay, and you can see the slides now? Okay, wonderful. So that was just an example of what hand-underhand strategies can look like. Do you want to add anything to that, Rose, or should we keep rolling?
Let's keep rolling.
Okay, great. But if you want more information, we have a whole many hour super fun interactive training we can do on hand-underhand. So let us know. It's not that many hours, just a few. So here are some pictures of examples of kind of what we're talking about to help make it a little more concrete for y'all. So on the left, you see one example of tactile object communication that has real objects. So you can see there's a card with socks. There are some miniature objects. There's a card with a tiny chair. There's a card with a sippy cup, a spoon, a board book, a rubber ducky, probably means bath time. That's a good example, I think, of early symbolism, right? You have to be careful with miniatures because sometimes that could be a little bit confusing. If you imagine a small child's, plastic sheep toy they might have, that's very different from a real sheep, right? And so if we're working with deafblind students that have a lot of limitations in their access to incidental learning, that one might not totally click for them, but a lot of these other things are pretty literal if you're working with someone who needs real depictions of real objects, so tactile depictions of real objects. And again, if you're using hand under hand, this might take a little bit more time as the student is learning to use it than a visual symbol might, because they need the time to explore and to build their own skills at gathering information through touch, which is very important for blind, low vision, and deafblind students. So the next picture is some examples of stack symbols, which is one set you can purchase to build kind of customized tactile symbols. I'll show you where to get that from later in the presentation. So you can see that picture, it's a little bit more abstract. Like there's a big X that you can feel for, I think that one is no. There's 2 pluses for more. So that's a lot more abstract and symbolic for a student who is, able to access that complexity of communication. But these are all things that can be felt. There's some partial objects too, like that little cup, that small toothbrush, etc. Another whole object example is the third picture, which is that crushed can for recycle. So that is a real 3D object, but it symbolizes it has a symbolic meaning. So, you know, if you're working with a student, for example, who's older, who's doing some vocational tasks and they're, you know, collecting the recycling at school or something, that's where you might use something like that. And then the last one is just another example of real objects, but this is more of like a sequencing. So you can see the real objects are in a sequence along the board. And so you can use that in the same way you would use a picture-based schedule with a student. And Rose will talk about that a little bit more in a couple slides. A few more examples. These are the stack symbols I talked about. So you can see like the one that says William on it. That is a they've created representational tactile objects for each person. So that's the student plus the people he sees on his team. The next picture are also stack symbols, but you can see there's some that are black rectangles. There's the yellow with the 3 bumps. There's the green ones with the arrow. So those are all for different parts of speech. Like you can see the green ones, those are all verbs: want, eat, go. So these can be, and then the third picture with the stack symbols attached using Velcro to a fold-out folder is a good example of what Rose was talking about in terms of making those symbols accessible to a student to use for expressive communication. So sometimes when I go in classrooms, you see a lot of attempts at using symbols receptively, giving the student information, but we want to make sure the student can use that same communication system to express wants, needs, questions. And so having some type of way to, if you're using this type of system, right, it's not on a tablet, they need to know, you know, my folder is always right here and I can take it out and I can take out, you know, this card to ask what we're having for lunch or whatever. So, and that one I think is all different objects that represent the different people that child sees throughout the day. The one on the far right is not a stacks example. That's the one on the far right is actually from the Texas School for the Blind, Texas School for the Deaf-Blind, Texas School for, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the acronym, but I'll show it to you in a minute. But they have kind of created their own system in their deaf-blind classrooms, which is really cool. And you can see similarly the shape of there's the object on top of a shape. The shape represents the part of speech or kind of the category. And that's sort of, if you imagine that as being analogous to having when kids have a pretty big AAC vocabulary, being able to dial into kind of the section they want. And then there's some individual markers that they have there's the day of the week, different support staff. So that's just another example what they can look like. There's not necessarily one set that is right or wrong or best. But what's important, like Rose was sharing, is consistency across the team, consistency throughout the child's educational experience. All right, we're on the calendar example now, Rose.
Okay. So calendar systems, you know, when we think about a typical calendar, it's showing days of the week and, you know, the weeks within the month and so forth. But when we talk about tactile calendar systems, they can kind of represent a certain period of time, like even within what does the day look like for a person. So it really works well, you know, to deal with those transitions of what to anticipate, what's coming up next. So here's an example of a tactile calendar system. May have a series of symbols here that represent different activities are going to happen throughout the day. Perhaps this is a vocationally oriented one of tasks somebody might be engaging in throughout the day. And typically how we use them sometimes, you know, if there's been set up or a series of symbols, you know, going across, then there might be a basket at the end, you know, for a done basket. So once that task is over, they move their symbol into the done basket. And then they know, okay, I'm on to the next one. Here's the next activity. Okay, Nikki, let's go through some of those resources.
Okay, so like we just mentioned, that the stacks symbols, you'll see a picture of that on the bottom left. So you can, the stacks communication kit from American Printing House can be used to create those 3-dimensional or partial object-based communication system. You can purchase the And we're not selling these. We're not affiliated. It's not endorsement, but you can purchase the set, the kind of basic building set, and then you can purchase add-on packs with different symbols you can use, or you can just like Velcro or hot glue the symbols you're using. And I mentioned AIM later in this presentation, but Louisiana Accessible Educational Materials, the AIM Center, has access to federal funding that can be used to purchase these types of items for students that are registered as blind or low vision or deaf-blind through the AIM Center. And if you have questions about whether or not your student is registered, if you have a TVI on your team, they likely will know. If not, you can always reach out to us and we can connect you with AIM and sort of figure out the process for ordering these types of materials if you need something like this. The Symbols and Meaning Kit, also available from APH, can support implementation, building the student up to where they're ready to use this, the more complex Stacks kit. And then it's also good to add to these tactile symbols either large print labeling or Braille as it is appropriate to the student. So if the student is also, we're also introducing Braille. You want those Braille, you can get Braille labeling tape again through AIM. It's pretty easy to order and add those. You can add large print, or if the student is completely blind and not using vision at all, it still sometimes is worth putting the print under the Braille so that everyone on the team can quickly read what those cards are for. So it's good to label them. And I believe Tracy is going to put in the chat, has already put in the chat for y'all. Thanks, Tracy. Those 2 links. And I'm also, if you email me after this, I'm happy to share that. Let's see. And here is another example that you can use. So this is the 3D Universal Core Vocabulary Symbols, which were developed by a different project. And then volkswitch.org has kind of, I don't want to say hacked it, but updated it to make it more customizable for people that are using 3D printers to create this type of stuff. So on the left, you can see kind of what it looks like coming off the 3D printer. It has Braille on one side, the tactile symbol on the other, and then is a certain shape, right? Again, the shape of the exterior shape of the symbol often correlates to the category or the part of speech. The picture on the right has a few examples. You can see they have the Braille and the embossed letters on them. They have those little hooks on top so that they can be attached to something, so that there's like a set of those that the student and the teacher can access. And then you'll notice even the edges of those symbols have different textures, and that helps the student identify what they're using. Okay, Rose is going to talk about options for students with low vision.
Right. So let's talk about just enhancing your visual supports for students with low vision. If you're using photos, drawings, you want to make sure that they're clear with well contrast and that they're very simple graphics. You want to get rid of any visual clutter or too much detail that, doesn't allow them to see what's really important. Sometimes if there's color images and you really want to help them focus their attention, you might add like a black outline to shapes or key features that you want them to focus on. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to have good colors, good contrasting colors, and make sure everything's very simple. Like I said, not a great deal of detail. And sometimes you might want to explain the features, the key features that you want them to see, to make sure that they understand what that image is. All right, Nikki, let's talk more about how to enhance things for people with CVI. Perfect.
So students that have cortical visual impairment, or CVI, that's a brain-based vision impairment. And so we have a workshop series we're really excited about in the spring that I'll share the link to later if you want to register. But essentially, students with CVI, in brief, need both to use to develop their visual strategies and to use tactile skills. So they're almost always going to be gathering information both ways. Students may not be able to process two-dimensional images at all if they have CVI. So you always want to start with those real objects. It's important to minimize visual clutter and complexity. So for example, you might want to have a big black cloth covered kind of board and present one object in front of it. That if you're working with a student on their vision. And students with CVI typically, and this is true of a lot of students that have significant support needs or multiple disabilities, but particularly students with CVI have trouble processing more than one sensory channel at once. So if that is a student that is deafblind and is using some vision and some touch, you want to give them the opportunity to work on one and work on the other separately. If it's a student that is hearing or has some access to hearing, this is different from what we often do. You want to talk first, then let them look. Talk first, then let them touch. Don't be talking while they're doing their exploration of the tactile objects, because typically they won't be able to process both. So sometimes our impulse to talk, put language in doesn't work that well for kids with CVI, and they need a little bit more spare communication, a lot of processing time, and then kind of quiet and low stimulation to explore their visual or tactile objects. Students with CVI tend to have a need for a lot of light, preferred colors. They might be able to see better. Often they can see things that are moving better, so you want to take advantage of that when you're presenting tactile objects or real objects for them to look at. If the student is at a point where they're able to process 2D images, you want to make them simple, clear pictures of real images rather than abstracted drawings. When in doubt, consult the CVI AAC matrix. We don't have time to talk about that today, but it's a really wonderful tool for pairing AAC options with a student who has CVI. And so ideally, that would be kind of a team process with the SLP and your VI teacher and your special ed teacher to look at what's going to work best for that student if they have CVI. Quick picture of a CVI-friendly calendar system. So you'll see this is a kind of matte black background, so we're minimizing visual clutter, and then a lot of the objects on here are those bright colors that kids with CVI tend to be able to see better. Yellows, golds, reds, shiny stuff, etc. And then this is a student who's learning Braille as well, so the Braille is there too. And there's a lot of space between objects. I have a couple of videos to show you, but I don't think we have time to show them, unfortunately. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
You can go a little longer if you need to.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. Okay, these are great because they really show how this can work well. So the first one, Trey reading for the first time. Again, we're conceptualizing literacy broadly for the student. Let's take a look. It's a very short video. I'm sorry, y'all. Shot on a cell phone camera, so it's very small.
Bubble wrap? Yeah, you love bubble wrap, don't you? Do you love bubble wrap? Yeah. So this tray. What's this?
Go.
Yeah. Tray goes where?
Where?
Where does tray go?
Where does tray go?
What is that?
What is that?
Is it a little stick? A little branch? And then what's this? A rock?
Yeah.
So tray goes
outside.
Good job. Good job. Symbol.
I love that video. It's very sweet. But you can see he's really taking his time to explore those tactile objects, and was able to put those together. This student is going over an object-based calendar system. She's deafblind, so she's using sign language and spoken language. Well, she's using spoken language receptively, sign language receptively, sign language expressively, and a calendar system that has Braille and tactile objects.
As I'm in the midst
I'm
of
so sorry, y'all. Ads.
my personal statement.
Okay.
Now it's your turn to sign. What's that one? Keyboard. What? One more time. Yes, keyboard. Good signing. And then oh, what's that one? Art. Class with Eric. Eric. Good sign, you. And then what's that one? PE, both hands. PE, good. PE. And you guys are swimming, both hands, swimming, swimming, swimming with Stephanie. Good stuff.
So I'm going to stop it there, even though I also love this video because I think that gives you a good sense of what they're doing. But you can see she has a pretty complex system that has both cards to identify the people that she does each of her classes with and the activity they're going to be doing. Okay, these are some of the resources I mentioned that you can explore that we mentioned throughout the presentation. American Printing House, you can order things through the AIMS Center from them. And also they have a lot of free online quick videos explaining these things, one-pager overviews, wonderful resource. Louisiana AIMS Center to order some of these items. And also sometimes they can come in and do an AAC, not an eval, but some consulting if you don't have the personnel in your district to do that. The DeafBlind Project is offering a workshop, an all-day workshop on CVI, working with young children who have CVI in 4 different cities throughout the state. And Tracy's going to put that registration link in the chat. If you'd like to register, please join us. It is free. We're going to have lunch. It'll be really fun. We have a newsletter for professionals and teachers. If you're interested in being added to the newsletter, please just put your email in the chat and I'll go back and add you. And then the Texas DeafBlind Project also has some really wonderful resources, examples, free training online. I always like to mention them because they're our neighbors and they sometimes have really great conferences too, online and in person. And Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired is the school name I was stumbling over earlier. They have some really wonderful deaf-blind specific classrooms and professionals and really are a great model school for that. So those are the resources I wanted to share with you. Here's information about the next Lunch and Learn. Here is a QR code. We'd love if you give us any feedback you have and take our survey. And if you have a couple minutes to stick around, we're really happy to answer any questions.
Nikki, you have 2 questions in your chat.
Wonderful. Okay, let me go grab them. The first one, Amy, would you be able to help with classrooms that have real objects and want to move to more abstract symbols? That is a great question. Absolutely. We're happy to have a kind of more in-depth conversation on that. I think it's hard always to answer questions like this because, you know, you want to know more about the student and kind of where they're at. But yeah, let's put our heads together and talk more about what that transition can look like and how to kind of verify as you go. But
I think I really wanted to just see if that was something in the realm of what you do, not a specific student, you know, so I just didn't know if that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely work on that together. I see, thank you for that question. Karen Nelson, where would you start with a 13-year-old who's blind and has no functional use of arms, hands, and severe cognitive deficits? So I would recommend actually trying hand under hand strategies, or sometimes if kids really are not able to use their hands or take in sensory information in their hands, sometimes there's other, you know, creative ways like letting them feel it on their skin, on their cheek. Sometimes kids really like using their feet more. I know that is not something we typically do in school, but I mean, with some kids, it works. But yeah, I don't know if you want to add to your question, but the best answer for you is we're happy to talk with you more about that student and see if we can brainstorm ways or even come visit your classroom and work together to see what might be a way to introduce more touch-based objects to that student.
I would love that. This particular student is shaken baby syndrome. She's non-ambulatory, has no functional use of her hands. They're very, what do I want to say, closed in almost a fist. The biting has gotten better. So what I've been doing is just trying to get her to use a voice output switch where she requests more. She likes like tickling and a very soft touch. So it's just basically trying to get her to respond and understand that she has a little more control over her environment. Other than that, I'm not quite sure where to go with her.
Yeah, let's talk some more. We might be able to look at like really trying to inventory some of the preferences, which you already mentioned, a really good one, or things that she really likes. Looking at the communication matrix as a tool I like to use in that scenario. And, to see if the switch is working for her, if there's alternatives to the switch, we can try to build that communication. And yeah, let's talk some more. And, a lot of students with that profile, students that don't students that are nonverbal or don't have any formal language system can't be tested for auditory processing disorder.
Correct.
Many of them are believed to have auditory processing disorder, kind of by observational, which is just a way of saying, the labels are not that important, but if that's what is suspected, that's a student that can be registered with the DeafBlind Project, and then we can provide more intensive support over time. So all that is to say, if you would please email me, I'd love to have a consultation about that student and see if we can come visit.
I would love that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Let me just make sure there's no other question. Any other questions? Okay. Anything you want to add, Rose?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Please do that quick evaluation. We need that feedback and we always look at it. And we'll hope you'll join for the Friday, February 2nd at 12 Lunch and Learn tips from a speech language pathologist. Thanks, everyone. Have a great Friday.